why it's just me and not me and John. All right, we are live. I am joined by A.N. I know your first name, but I don't know if you want me to say it. Okay, oh, cool, yeah. Alex. All right, man. Make sure. I just thought about that. I should have asked. A true professional would have gotten that done before, asking on the live. But how you doing, my man? How you doing, Alex? How's life been treating you?
It's been all right. It's been a long haul since I was last, for example, with you and John in December. So just finished my first year of graduate school. Completed 3 weeks of annual training out in 29 Palms, California. Not fun. Really hot, very dry, dusty, but doing okay. I mean, I don't really have much to complain about in terms of my personal life.
Yeah.
So,
how are you liking grad school?
I can't say I enjoy it. Did not enjoy taking, for example, macroeconomics. Did not enjoy advanced statistics. Didn't enjoy accounting, and so it was. But these were necessary stepping stones. These are just rites of passage, stuff that you just kind of have to get through. And I'm hoping that when I do finish, that the master's degree will be worth something that I can eventually go work for. Either a think tank out in DC, like the Brookings Institute, the Wilson Center, or do humanitarian work with, say, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. There's something meaningful. That's kind of the whole point. And so sometimes you have to. The saying goes that you have to sometimes go through hell in order to get to heaven. I do truly believe that personally, and so can't say it's fun all the time, but I think a few things in life are always enjoyable, right? So. I'm old enough to know that.
And right.
With that being said, I think what I'm doing is meaningful, so I'm so motivated to keep going.
Yeah. I share your opinion with grad school. I was in school, forever, I feel like. And grad school, when I got my master's degree, I stepped out. I said, all right, that is the last time I'm going to school. It's not happening again. I have I've said for many years that the thing with people is that they love learning. People really love learning, but we hate school. School is just especially the way school is structured for us. Yeah. I mean, school doesn't have to be the way that it's set up for the United States of America, but it is what it is. And like you said, it does in general pay off for you in the long run, which is like a topic I intended to talk about. But since we're discussing it, the strong thrust of anti-intellectualism in the United States. And it not only applies to the obvious ones where people say that global warming isn't real, evolution is just an unproven theory, psychology is nonsense, and trans issues or queer issues are just fake stuff created by scientists and doctors and experts, COVID and everything, and just pushing this nonsense on people to lead them further down conspiracy theory rabbit holes, which we will get into. That is something I want to talk about, conspiracy theories, for obvious reasons. And but it also bleeds over into the dismissal of education in general. Not only can you not trust doctors, scientists, professors, experts, anyone who's gone to school to learn about these specific topics, but you shouldn't bother going to school either. You shouldn't high school preferably going to high school being taught by your mom, in the garage or something like that, if you have to go to school at all. But then after that, just forget the idea of going to any other higher education, because that's just going to indoctrinate you to forget the roots from your Baptist pastor or something like that. And this movement, it's not most Americans, but it's enough that it concerns me. Have you seen this a lot?
Definitely. I would say, because I spent a lot of time down south. I lived in Quantico, Virginia for a time because I was there for the basic school. And then I moved from there down to Jacksonville, North Carolina. Plus, my mom lived in Birmingham, Alabama for 6 years while she was getting her PhD. So I visited Alabama frequently. I've got an aunt and an uncle that are down in Georgia as well. So there's definitely, I'm not saying this is all of the South. It's not. There are actually parts of the South that are very progressive and very left-wing too, that I found. Not liberal, but like truly leftist. And so, not stereotyping the South when I say what I'm about to say, but I've definitely seen pockets of this country, certainly in the Deep South, that are still very anti-intellectual folks who, for example, on top of all the conspiracies you mentioned about, say, global warming, or trans issues, queer issues, when the COVID vaccine, for example, was coming around, there were all the conspiracies about, oh, the COVID vaccine, it's going to turn you gay, or the COVID vaccine is going to make you autistic, or it's going to kill you. And I'm thinking, well, but is any of this actually grounded in any even epidemiological evidence, let alone anything that's mechanistic? And sure enough, no. But doesn't matter, right? The idea is that, oh, Fauci is this like witch doctor who's going around trying to poison the world, and this is basically what they thought. And
right, you're not exaggerating.
Yeah. So
yeah, and by the way, so two things. First, feel free to, at every available opportunity, generalize the South. I do it all the time. I do it all the time. Like I can, because I'm from the South. I was born in North Carolina, and my family members live down there. And I always joke about how the South, since the inception of this country, the South has consistently, as a whole, gotten everything wrong. That doesn't mean there aren't great people
true.
In the South, but if you pick your period in American history and look at, okay, well, here's what they should do and here's what they shouldn't do. Guarantee the South will be doing the wrong thing. And like, if you look at what's a wild read is reading about the formation of the Constitution of the United States of America, because we're not necessarily taught history when it comes to the formation of the United States. We're taught mythology. We're taught that we had these exceptional human beings who weren't quite gods, but certainly more than men, who just, graced themselves upon the stage of history and were guided by capital G God in crafting this perfect document that we have preserved. I know, right? It's hard to even say without rolling your eyes. We preserved for 250 years, and this is the birth of our nation and everything. But then when you read what actually happened, like the Constitution was essentially just a series of patchwork bargains made to stop the slave states from bitching, because they kept whining. Like, no matter what deal was brought in front of them, nothing was ever good enough. The 3/5 compromise is just, it's one of the more embarrassing parts of the Constitution. And buddy, there is a lot of competition there. And it's just like, for those of you who don't know what it is, a lot of people like to claim that the Constitution states that Black people were 3/5 of a person. That's not what it says. Constitutionally, Black people are 0/5 of a person. Like, they don't really count as people at all. However, the slave states wanted to increase their representation in Congress, which was based on your population. So if you're New York and you have, say, 5 million people, you get representation based on your population of 5 million. If you're South Carolina and you have 2 million people and 2 million white people and 2 million slaves, you have 4 million people. But they said, okay, well, you're not going to get representation for 2 million slaves. They're not citizens. They can't vote. And the South thought that was wildly unfair. They said, no, we should get representation for these people who we don't even count as human beings. Like, it's like getting representation because I have 100 tractors. Like, it's essentially farm equipment is what you're asking to be counted. And of course, that makes no sense. Like, if you're really going to operate under the system of slavery, you can't then pretend you're treating them like full citizens. So they said, okay, we'll give you 3/5 of representation based on every slave, which was a hell of a deal for the South, a hell of a deal. And they still kept whining. They still kept bitching and complaining for what? 70 more years until they fought an actual civil war over it. And also, you can't be going to the South and using phrases like mechanistic epidemiology, man. You can't be doing that. I'm sorry. If you want to communicate, that's not the place to bust out the 10-letter words, the $10 words. But best of luck to you in the future on that. But yeah, I just I don't want to dance around the issue here. Perhaps you guys have heard about what happened yesterday. A gentleman by the name of Donald John Trump was in I think Butler, Pennsylvania, I believe is where this took place. And there was a shooting. I'm not sure we know the name of the person who did it yet. I saw a lot of people passing out the names, some guy named like Thomas Crooks or something like that. But I don't know if that's been confirmed. I heard someone say it wasn't him. I don't know. Do you know if that's been confirmed yet?
I've seen a few different names, but I think it's too early to say exactly who it was. But yeah, whoever did it, part of the reason they did it, I think undoubtedly, was to kind of get their name out there. So they're probably, and maybe there were two gunmen, who knows? But it's still currently under investigation. So I wouldn't want to say anything that's premature or making hasty generalizations. But
yeah, that's exactly where I'm going with this, because when it happened, I made a video about it on TikTok shortly after I heard about it, saying that I think that at the time we just knew Trump was bleeding from his ear, and so everyone assumed it was a round that had just barely grazed his ear. And so I said something like, Trump came within a few inches of being publicly assassinated. And so I think it's high time we start taking conservatives seriously when they say that God is on Donald Trump's side, because that is some George Washington shit right there, just barely avoiding being publicly murdered like that. And it's kind of hard to argue that God is not on Trump's side after seeing something like that. And it fits into my theory that God is real and he's evil. It makes perfect sense that, if we're going to assume that there's a God who intervenes in human events, this is a pretty strong indicator of where his sympathies lie. So, Trump, literally dodging death and avoiding death like that just kind of, shows that, God being an evil, malevolent force who revels in the suffering of living creatures. Of course, he'd do something like that. It makes perfect sense to me. But one thing that bothered me about this is how many comments I saw on my video from people who follow me, people who, presumably are, at the worst, just like left-leaning or liberal at the absolute worst, and then going over all the way to, the far left and socialism and everything like that. People saying stuff like, oh, this is staged. Oh, this is nonsense. This is all made up. And it's like, bro, what is going on here? Like we're better than this. We don't know anything about what happened yet. And people just like swearing up and down, no, this is a false flag. This is bullshit. I was like, people are dead. I feel actually I don't feel the same. Like when Sandy Hook happened, I would get really upset. I was obviously more upset with Sandy Hook than I am with what happened yesterday, obviously. But when there were actually dead people, like the confirmed, people gone, I'm having a hard time buying this. Yeah, this is all a whole setup here. And so I don't know about you if you've seen any of this lately, but I've been pretty disappointed in the reaction with people so far. Oh no. Alex, are you there? Alex, you there?
You cut off a bit there. But I believe the last word you said was the reactions, right?
Shit, I lost
the reactions if I've seen anything similar.
Yeah, that's the last thing I said, is I've been really disappointed in the reaction of folks. What have you seen lately?
Similar stuff, saying that it was staged, saying that they had some gunman, like somebody who just so happened to aim right at his ear at 140 yards or however long it was. I'm thinking that's one hell of a shot to me. I mean, if you're aiming at something that small, like somebody's ear, I mean that's and then on top of that, I saw these Clinton conspiracy theories saying, "Oh, Hillary Clinton's out to get him." I'm thinking, well, she's running for political office, so what incentive would she really have at this point? Yeah, I saw this meme, Hillary Clinton pissed off, and the caption reads, "What you missed?" I see that, and it goes back to that whole Clinton conspiracy theory about they killed Vince Foster and they killed Seth Rich and all this other stuff, and then of course there are people blaming Joe Biden, saying, "Oh, it's his camp," or it's the feds. They're trying to take out Trump because they think they can't get him in jail. He's going to beat the investigation or whatever. So this is their way of trying to take him out during an election year because he's a threat to the establishments. It's some hired assassin with, somebody who is affiliated with the DNC. And I'm thinking, well, no, whoever did this was somebody who was obviously very deranged. And to my understanding, the theories that I heard was, oh, it was somebody inspired by Antifa. It's Antifa trying to take out Trump. I'm thinking, well, if that were the case, it's like they obviously didn't get the job done then, if that's truly what you think.
Yeah.
And it's not very sophisticated to just try to run up in a crowded area like that and try to take out the president, right? So, or anybody for that matter, but especially somebody with as much protection around them as the president. What I found truly sad too is the fact that you have, even if I don't agree with their political opinions, these innocent bystanders, these people in Pennsylvania that were out there to see Trump, people who maybe even traveled out of state to go see him. And I know there was one confirmed death amongst the spectators, and somebody else who I heard was critical. And I hope that they make it, and certainly offer my condolences to their family, to the families of those that were impacted by this. And so, yeah, and just making conspiracy theories about something like this is just sickening. It's you go back to Sandy Hook, it reminds me of the conspiracy theory. Like, and I hate to bring this up because I don't like giving this person any attention, but when Alex Jones is going around saying that Sandy Hook was an inside job, and he got hit with a massive class action lawsuit, and this, to my understanding, is why he was taken off of Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I mean, he just was blacklisted essentially off of social media entirely. And as much, I remember Bill Maher's reaction, oh, well, First Amendment rights. I'm thinking, well, yeah, he has the right to express a controversial opinion, but to promote a blatantly false conspiracy theory like that to millions of people, especially when it involves the death of innocent little children, that's a completely separate matter. And so, yeah, there are certain times where memes and jokes are funny, and there's another time when they're just offensive. And I think that because innocent people were killed in this particular incident yesterday, now it's not the time for conspiracies and for jokes and stuff like that. So just my personal opinion.
Did you hear about I don't know if you heard me mention Sandy Hook before I cut out. Did you? Okay. I was making sure. I didn't know if I got it through. Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of just because like, there's no good that comes out of just immediately assuming just because, you're afraid this will make Trump look good, which it will. Like, you're afraid, like, you don't like that, so it can't be real. It's like, that's not how to process information. That's exactly what we've been making fun of MAGA for doing for the last 8 years. Every time something bad that besmirches the name of the fine, upstanding citizens of MAGA, whenever something like that happens, they immediately say, oh no, it's false. Like, remember January 6th? Like minutes after January 6th was going down, everyone, I knew people saying, oh, this is obviously Antifa making us look bad. It's like, you're just saying that. You have no evidence for it whatsoever. You just want to, protect your side. And another thing about the whole concept that this is a stage, because what I heard is that this is a stage conspiracy by, the Trump campaign, and one thing you mentioned too is that, okay, did they plan for Trump to get injured? Because then it goes to what you said. So you're saying back when everyone thought that it was a bullet that hit him, that they actually, like, Trump volunteered to have someone shoot his ear. Like, you don't think that's real. And now that we found out it was glass, and so they had the ballistics worked out perfectly, where they would hit the teleprompter knowing it would cut his ear and not his eye. Come on, it's nonsense. You can't really believe that shit. And what you also mentioned too, like, let's just assume that this theory makes sense, that they had planned to stage this fake assassination. Why would they do it in public like that? Like, why would they do it in public where it could be exposed and caught? You have it on camera. They could, break down anything, any inconsistencies. Why would there just be one guy? You could have had several to make sure the job. I mean, I just that was odd. And like any nonsense conspiracy theory, and sure, look, could it have been fake? Yeah, sure, I guess. If you want to say I don't know. I'm not omniscient. I don't know everything. It just does. We got to Occam's razor this shit when this stuff goes down, and make sure that it makes sense. And like most conspiracy theories, just one or two questions kind of makes it fall apart. It just collapses in on itself, because if you're actually planning something this large, and to do what exactly? To make Trump more likely to win the presidency. Trump was up in the polls. This is not something you do when Biden is on his back foot, when he's fighting for his life, not only in front of the American people, but to his own party. Joe Biden has never been weaker. Why would you pull off something risky like a fake murder attempt whenever you're ahead? That doesn't make sense at all. So it's just this gut feeling, emotional reaction because you're afraid that Trump is going to look more popular, which, yeah, sure he will. But living in a fantasy world isn't going to make that better.
I completely agreed. I mean, for one, the first thing I'm thinking is, he's going to see a huge jump in the polls. I'd be very surprised if that weren't the case. Because really, this reminded me of when Theodore Roosevelt, for example, in 1912, was trying to run for his third term, not consecutive term, and he got shot during a speech, and yet he still went on to continue the speech. And so he tends to get kind of lionized for that. It reminds me of that.
He did not win, though, interestingly enough.
Win,
I just thought about that. He didn't win that election. Yeah. So.
And that was where, to my understanding, because it was him against Taft, there was that split in the Republican Party.
Right.
Theodore Roosevelt in the Bull Moose Party. And then that was really what helped Woodrow Wilson kind of propel himself and win. So, but the idea is, though, is that to this day, more than 100 years later, we still talk about Theodore Roosevelt and think of him as like one of the most badass presidents of all time. Might do that series that you have on TikTok, where can you beat the shit out of every U.S. president? So
I have that series, which I have to finish because I kind of stalled on. The last one I did was like Woodrow Wilson, I think, and I haven't picked up since. But and people ask me about it, I got to finish. But I did another video talking about every president who got shot in office, and so and so. With that one, people bring up Roosevelt a lot because Roosevelt's not in the video. And I say, well, this is about people who got shot in office. And, he was shot running for office. And so Trump would have. But you're right. This is like, look, I hate when people don't face reality just because it's uncomfortable for them. That image of Trump pumping his fist and having the blood on his face, it's badass. It is. I mean, you can admit it. It's fine. It's perfectly fine to
the flag flaving too and everything. Yeah.
And it is baller as fuck. It's okay to admit it. It doesn't mean Trump is good. It doesn't mean I'm saying vote for Trump. I'm just giving credit where credit is due. The guy got shot. And this is something. Oh, this is another thing people will talk about why they believe it's a conspiracy because of the fist pump and the photo op. And they're like, oh, isn't it convenient that, a shooting just happened and he just so happened to stand up and pump his fist. Why wasn't he running away? It's like, whenever people say that, I know right away they're not born entertainers. Like some people are, because I tell you, look, I'd have done the exact same thing. I would have done the exact same thing. And if you're someone who Trump is a goddamn moron. He is. There's no real debate about that as far as I'm concerned. But he is a skilled entertainer and a crowd reader, and he has some of the best show business instincts that you could possibly possess. And if you are an entertainer and you don't immediately realize why, once he realized that a shooting, shots were fired, he was hit, he was okay, and the crowd was right there before he moved out. Like, damn well he was going to get that photo op. It was the least surprising thing to me at all. But people are just tacking that in as part of the conspiracy, which I don't know. I just I'm just really disappointed in folks because conspiracies, and there are conspiracies and there are conspiracies. There are conspiracies. Like, the government did MK Ultra. That was a conspiracy. Like the Gulf of Tonkin was mostly bullshit. That's a conspiracy. But people just have a hard time accepting that sometimes fantastic and wild and unbelievable events happen that they're just like one person doing something weird. Like people just have a hard time buying that,
Yeah, I mean, completely agreed. And with conspiracies, another one that just really popped into my mind was the Kennedy assassination. In terms of all the conspiracies that came out of that one. I mean, that's one of those. There are, especially with everything that's gone on over the last 9 months, some people say, oh, it was AIPAC that killed him, or some Zionists that killed him.
AIPAC, I heard that one.
Because they say that because he didn't want Israel to have nuclear weapons after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some tend to lionize him and say, oh, he wanted it to be considered a foreign entity. He didn't want them to have nuclear weapons. And they kind of portray him as sort of this bulwark against Zionism. And I'm thinking, well, Kennedy, I think, tends to get a little bit too much credit, tends to be deified a bit too much. If you look at what he and his brother did to Marilyn Monroe, or if you look at the way he mishandled Vietnam, because a lot of the way Vietnam turned out really started with him, didn't end with him, obviously. And Lyndon B. Johnson certainly shares a lot of that blame too. But anyway, a lot of it really, like the use of Agent Orange, started with Kennedy. And anyway, so all the conspiracy theories that have come out of that, even since, like, that was what, over 60 years ago now, and we're still talking about it. So there are some times where conspiracy theories definitely seem like they have some bearing. So when I first heard about the mafia taking out Kennedy, and there was this big discussion about his interests in Cuba, that when Castro took over, he kicked all the mobsters out of Cuba, because organized criminals and communists tend to not really mesh, because organized criminals like to take and hoard wealth, and communists say, no, you should redistribute it. And the organized criminals say, no, make us. And this is why they come in contact. They come in conflict. This is kind of why Reagan, for example, gave weapons to the Contras in Nicaragua and to other drug dealers throughout Latin America. And it's kind of why crack became, and other narcotics became a problem in the US, because you're weaponizing cartels. And so with Kennedy, he had his own interests in terms of Cuba, but the mob, apparently, and we'll never confirm this in terms of how true it is, but supposedly Santo Trafficante had worked with Kennedy. They wanted to collude to poison Castro. Kennedy said, I have a better idea. I'm going to launch the Bay of Pigs invasion. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a miserable failure. Then the mob got pissed about that and said, hey, supposedly they helped him win in 1960 when it was a really close election between him and Richard Nixon. One of the big states that Kennedy won was Illinois, and that's because of Chicago. The mob controlled Chicago. They helped him win. Then, to my understanding, JFK appointed his brother, Robert Kennedy, to be Attorney General. As Attorney General, he started coming after the mob, and so the mob didn't take on to that. So they got Lee Harvey Oswald, who is, to my understanding, kicked out of the Marine Corps for being a nut, but he was a nut who could shoot. But there was probably a second gunman, but Seal never confirmed that either. So it's a wild conspiracy theory that when I first heard it, I was like, there's no way. But then I started to kind of unpack it, but I thought, there might actually be some truth to this, because it just seems like a mafia style hit. Another more historically recent example was with the Epstein death. I guess I'll use that to be politically neutral. Was it actually a suicide? I remember seeing these jokes and memes, like the Jeffrey Epstein ornaments. Oh, the ornament didn't hang itself, and all these conspiracies that came out about who wanted to keep Epstein silent because of all the dirt that he had on people. And so, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist personally, but there are certain instances where it's like, hey, if you can make a logical case and provide evidence to defend what you're saying, then I might actually believe it if it is logically substantiated. And with this Trump thing, I mean, we'll see exactly what comes out of it. But yeah, in terms of these theories about it being staged, that I just, for all the reasons you just mentioned, I throw that out the window immediately.
Yeah, there's nothing to base it on. It's just emotional speculation to, well, just realized I had a fan on over here. Hope the noise wasn't the background right there. But a couple of things I wanted to mention. First, I laughed pretty hard when you were talking about how the mob had their plan to assassinate Castro, and Kennedy's like, hey, I got a better plan. It's the Bay of Pigs invasion. Jesus, how bad was the mob plan? If the Bay of Pigs invasion was your better plan, I'd love to see how shitty the mob plan was. And I also thought, too, that they tried to assassinate Castro like dozens of times. Like it's like a comedy. Did you ever read that story about that lady they sent to assassinate Castro and she ended up falling in love with him? That was a great story. That was fan. It's so fantastical that I wouldn't believe it. It didn't come straight from her. Like she said it. That man, my throat is killing me. Sorry. Also, the Kennedy assassination. I had essentially thought for thought the same process you had just then. That was crazy. As you were talking about it, sorry, give me a second. As you were talking about it, I remember I went to college and I had a guy I knew who was big into the Kennedy assassination. He was talking about all these conspiracies for it. And I said, Mac, because it was Mac, I said, Mac, come on, this is nonsense. And for some reason I was doing some report, I don't know, and I went and watched a couple of documentaries on the Kennedy assassination, and I saw detailed breakdowns of the Zapruder film and all that stuff, and what all the different conspiracies leading up to it. After I watched those videos and read those reports and stuff, I was like, okay, the mob killed JFK. I remember just saying it out loud, like, yeah, this is very on the nose for me. That like both instances where the mob did help Kennedy. I mean, I don't got like dynamite absolute evidence for it, but it seems to indicate that they did kind of help Kennedy win Illinois. And under the deal that, hey, we do you a favor, you do us a favor. And then Bobby Kennedy like went hard as fuck against the mob and they felt betrayed by that. All of that actually did happen. So they at least had motive to go through with it. And then the weird connections with especially Jack Ruby with the mob and everything. Like Jack Ruby's a weird wild card out of nowhere in this story. Like, what you're telling me, like this random nightclub owner loved Kennedy so much. He just like he was his favorite president. And also wrote down here, I was going to ask at the end of I like to ask people for their like a hot take or controversial opinion. I've already got yours. Kennedy was a pretty fucking average to bad president. And I say this all the time too. Kennedy, it's not like he was a terrible bro. Like you can name worse ones, obviously. Oh, yeah. But for being as lionized as he is like, I mean, it was all right, I guess. It's not nothing to write home about, really. And Epstein's a great example. Because, yeah, obviously, the official narrative for the Epstein story makes no goddamn sense. Like, none at all. That, if I remember correctly, he was in prison with a cellmate, and the cellmate was conveniently removed, like, the day before he died. Suspicious as hell. He was already on suicide watch. If I remember correctly, he didn't have shoelaces in his shoes. They even have these special blankets that are like newspaper, so you can't hang yourself with them. The cameras just happened to stop working. 2 guards both fell asleep. There's nothing less believable than that story. Like I don't believe that story. Now, if you ask me, do I have evidence that someone actually went in there and killed him or they, encouraged him to do it? I have no proof whatsoever. I have none. I fully admit it. However, the official story cannot be true. Like that's a billion and one coincidence stacked on 10 other billion and one coincidences. And so, yeah, if they came out with something like that, I can see people buying into this. But for what we have now, there's just not much to go on here. So what do you think this indicates for the future? Because I don't know how you felt after it happened, but I had already been feeling a little despondent, I guess more than usual, with the state of the world and or our nation in particular, the world in general, but in particular our nation, in that we are a group of people and filled with populations of, I hate to just throw out uneducated because it's not just that. It's not just that. You can be illiterate and still be pretty smart, but people who are superstitious and conspiracy addled and, not terribly aware of how economics or politics or science or anything works. And they're desperate. And they're trying to find an enemy, and instead of turning against capitalism or something like that, they've turned against Mexicans and Middle Eastern people, and they're just, which is one of the reasons Trump is so popular, because he's an entertainer and he's finding a way for people to express their bigotries that are tamped down by society. And seeing something like this happen when for years now they've been pushing this narrative that they are coming to get you. The left is coming to massacre you at any time. And now their hero, their divinely chosen knight in shining armor, was literally shot at on live television. I don't know how they're going to react to this. Like, I don't. Do you have any? What's your I don't know, your best guess or a guess from what you've seen?
Well, it's exactly what we were saying earlier with the photo op, the fist in the air, coming off as this big badass. That Trump has always portrayed himself as from his time he campaigned or in the primaries back in 2015. I still remember when he was saying, I'm running against the crooked and biased media. And really, even Seth MacFarlane was saying is the reason Trump became popular is because he back then it was political correctness in 2016. Now it's called wokeness. I don't know exactly when that changed. I didn't catch the memo as to when they decided to change political correctness to wokeness, but the idea is that they're reacting to hyper liberalism, I guess is what they call it, or they'll say that the Democratic Party is turning communist, which is laughable to say the least.
I know.
But, in any case, I'm like, yeah, Joe Biden, when he voted to invade Iraq, yeah, what a communist move that was. But anyway, so in any case, and that's just for starters with him. But in any case, they're just going to portray it as, the crooked bias media, all the conspiracies are already coming out about, the Democratic Party tried to get him because he's standing against the establishment. They're afraid of him. They fear him. It's like, hey, Trump has the same corporate interests, many of the same corporate interests that Biden has. For example, when Biden, for example, funneled weapons to Saudi Arabia in exchange for the oil, Republicans will, at least on occasion, maybe attack him for that. But then when Trump did it, oh no, it was totally okay, right? It was wrong for Obama to do it, totally okay when Trump does it. It was wrong for Obama to bomb Syria, but it was totally okay when Trump did it. And so they're the double standards, right? The military-industrial complex, companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Atomics, General Dynamics, Malloy Corporation, we can keep going on. They, for example, certainly right now, are funneling weapons to Israel, as the Israeli government is facing international condemnation for really what is shaping out to be a genocidal campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, the Lancet, for example, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, just estimated 186,000 casualties, I think it was.
186,000, yep.
Yeah, so that's 20,000 plus people a month that they're killing, which is kind of insane. That certainly far outpaces what happens in Syria, what happens in Yemen, what's happening to the people of Sudan. Not that we should ignore any of those human rights atrocities, but the point is that Biden and Trump are really not that different. The joke is that they're two wings of the same bird. And I'm over here firmly of the opinion saying, hey, we need a third party. I mean, we need like a legitimate left-wing third party, because here's my biggest gripe or grievance, not just with government, but really with society at large. And it's that, I can argue, like I could spend 10 hours debating with somebody, arguing with them, sharing them every tip, technique, piece of information that I know. And I can't convince somebody to have morality or to have any sort of sense of humanity. I just can't. With certain people, they don't care. So for example, we can go back to Kennedy. There was I didn't know about him until I joined the Marine Corps and learned about him. General David Cho, S-H-O-U-P. He was the commandant of the Marine Corps from 1960 until New Year's Eve of 1963. So the typical 4-year term that a commandant serves. And he was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. Totally badass guy. I mean, this guy had taken a shot onto the leg and had a bullet graze his neck when he was fighting Imperial Japan, the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II. And so anyway, got a Medal of Honor for that. He later becomes the commandant of the Marine Corps, and he was opposed to the Bay of Pigs invasion, actually. He had several arguments with Kennedy, but he wasn't able to convince Kennedy that it was going to be a bad idea. Kennedy just had to learn the hard way and get embarrassed and humiliated by the Soviet Union and by Castro. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Then he criticized the escalation. He said about 500 advisors that Eisenhower left in Vietnam. That number escalated to about 15,000 by the time of Kennedy's assassination. And in that time, as troops were more and more being sent into Vietnam, General Shoup said, hey, this is dragging us into a fight that we have absolutely no business being in. We shouldn't be doing this. And Kennedy didn't listen. Kennedy had his strategic Hamlet program, created all these little villages throughout South Vietnam, most of which were underfunded, no electricity, no running water. And it was Ngo Dinh Diem and his henchmen that hoarded the resources that were given to him by the US. They weren't being distributed to the Buddhist population of South Vietnam. And that created a lot of resentment. And that's ultimately what led to them overthrowing Ngo Dinh Diem. So lots of corruption in South Vietnam. Then the use of Agent Orange, right? Operation Ranch Hand started with Kennedy. That killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Even a lot of Vietnam vets came back and had to file VA claims because they ingested Agent Orange and it destroyed their lungs. And it's horrible. It's like they were like today's burn pits, or you can think of Agent Orange as like the latter day burn pit, essentially, in terms of just how deleterious it was. And so then, of course, after he retired, after General Shoup left active duty, because he left right as Lyndon B. Johnson was taking power, his criticisms of the Vietnam War continued. In fact, they escalated. He became one of the staunchest critics of the Vietnam War effort. He went around college campuses encouraging kids to avoid conscription, and he was vicious in his criticism, not just of the Vietnam War effort, but he actually expanded to criticize the military-industrial complex in general. And he was right about everything. I mean, it's insane just how right he was. If he were alive today, I mean, had he lived, for example, to see, well, one, I'd argue Reagan's mishandling of Lebanon, but two, had he lived to see the Iraq War, the occupation of Afghanistan, the bombing of Libya, the bombing of Syria, if he had lived to see what's happening to the Palestinians now, there's no question he's tossing and turning in his grave, right? That he'd be walking around with a keffiyeh screaming from the river to the sea. And it's the thing is, though, despite the fact that he was right, Lyndon B. Johnson didn't listen. He ordered the FBI to wiretap and harass General David Cho instead, and Nixon continued that. So this guy was a war hero who would risk his life for the United States just for his country to turn on him. And when he dared to stand up and speak the truth. And so, and then you have a general who goes off like that, civilian leadership will retaliate in the worst kind of way. That's exactly what happened to Vietnam. That you flooded, the standards were dropped. You had a lot of horrible people who joined the military. So now the image of the military is tarnished. You've got wife beaters, drug addicts, and just other very, very low quality individuals who are not only joining, but being retained. And now you've got a culture that's very toxic. And that's bad, right? This is why General Lewis Wilson, when he became the commandant, made it very clear. He's like, hey, we have to get in step. And it's like, even if it's the sergeant major and I left, we'll purge every fat body and drug addict out of the Marine Corps. And he really put his foot down on that. Much the way the current commandant kind of did with like the hazing culture that came out of the War on Terror. And so with that being said, it's just like, that's the frustrating part, is you can have someone who knows what they're talking about and who is almost like a Socratean or Christ-like figure, whatever you want to call it, that dissenter. But how do you convince somebody to have a conscience when they just refuse to have one? That I can't answer that question, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, it is. It's really dark that the only solace you can take from that is the examples like with Shoup or Smedley Butler or stuff like that, is that it doesn't really matter who it comes from. Like there's no level you could ascend to. There's no credentials you could have. There's no experience you could show to prove to people that, hey, maybe making the moral choice is the right thing to do. If that doesn't spring from them internally, it just doesn't. And like with your example with General Shoup and everything, I was thinking that it's really unfortunate that the lion's share of statues we build are the people who win wars, not people who prevent them, when the people who prevent them should probably get more recognition. For example, like one of speaking of that era and incidents that took place, like with the Cuban Missile Crisis, I can't even remember the name of the Russian guy who refused to fire the missile, like preventing a nuclear war. That guy should be like a household name. I think the story's pretty popular, but I don't know. Maybe it's like a really hard to pronounce Russian name. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why. I don't know. I really don't know. But yeah, stuff like that are things that we really should focus a lot on, because you were talking about the sympathy aspect of it when you were mentioning how more people than I care to think about just have. It's not even that they don't have sympathy for what's happening in Gaza. They like it. They like it. They think it's great. They cheer for it. They want more. And it's like, they haven't learned their lesson yet. It's got to continue. And what's been interesting over the last 24 hours is I have seen from both sides or all sides of the political spectrum infinitely more sympathy for Donald Trump's bleeding ear than I have for thousands of charred Palestinian bodies. That's just true. It's just people care a lot more about that, a lot more about what happened to Trump. Not that I'm saying it was a good thing. It was obviously not, but just where are our priorities here? Like why do you? And I think we talked about this when you came on the Left Wing show with me and John a few months back. How whenever international tragedies happen, the reporting is always the same way. It'll be, 15 people died in an earthquake in Thailand, and 2 of them were American. Like, oh my God, there are 2 Americans, and we care more, as if, that means anything, that an American death actually hurts us. Well, people you didn't know existed. You didn't know they were American. You didn't know they were in a foreign country. You just heard that someone in your tribe died, and all of a sudden you care a lot more about it. And I don't know. This is what makes talking about international incidents so difficult when it comes to American politics. Because I would talk about, how how our dealings with the Israeli government and with Palestine was hurting Biden. Like he was losing a lot of support for, obvious reasons. But for the most part, like the vast majority of voters don't vote on foreign policy issues at all, no matter how bad they get. If you ask people like what their top 5 issues are, like 10% maybe are going to say, what's going on with, with Gaza. So it is just pretty depressing, but we can't, you mentioned how we can't change people's morality. Like we can't, but what can we change? Like in what way can we make people, like, even if they don't care about it on a moral level, like a way that can persuade them that does affect them somehow, like outside of their humanity?
Well, what I would say to that is, with a situation like the genocide of the Palestinian people, as it continues to grow, expands, and escalate, because I mean, war is not, as you see in a video game, it develops fairly slowly, right? So, for example, when Adolf Hitler was beginning to commit genocide against the Jewish people, right? That started in 1933, but the U.S. didn't care, didn't give two shits, pardon my French, until about 1941, right? Then, and only that was only because of Pearl Harbor getting hit. Then suddenly FDR says, "Oh, okay, now we have to get involved." It's like, okay, so you've got hundreds of thousands, millions of these people who have been killed around the world. And again, I'm not saying we carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, but there's got to be a limit to where we say, hey, we as a human race can't tolerate this, right? And so when it comes to something like that, I think the only way people are going to care is if, say, Israel starts to get overrun, they want to, for example, push into southern Lebanon, and it's going to be 10 times worse than 2006 was. It'll make 2006 look like a fight on a playground compared to what's going to come to them if they actually do try to push into Lebanon again. So say Israel starts to get overrun, we see protests in Egypt against King Abdullah, in Jordan against King Abdullah, against El-Sisi in Egypt, both of which are supported heavily by the United States. And so it's kind of like a second Arab Spring that's forming. And the question is, how long will the United States try to sort of occupy the Middle East, or the Levant specifically, by proxy? Because at some point, it's either, okay, you are going to have to either commit troops directly to this, and in order to defend Israel, you're going to have to put foreign boots on the ground, or you're just going to let the whole thing collapse. And I don't know. I tend to think that the mothers of America are going to care more about the safety of their sons and daughters than they're going to care about defending a segregationist apartheid state in the Middle East that doesn't historically give too much of a hoot about U.S. troops. Like when, for example, USS Liberty got bombed, or often a lot of folks don't know about the bombing of the Marine Corps barracks. This is actually something my mom also lived through when she was in Lebanon. So did my uncle. My grandmother was there as well. The Iranians, the ones that carried it out. But what wasn't known at the time was that Israel was actively funneling weapons to Iran under the table in what became known as the Iran-Contra scandal. And there was even a book written by a Mossad agent named Victor Ostrowski, who argued that Mossad knew it was going to happen, but they let it happen. They wanted it to happen because the Marines in Beirut stood up to them after the Sabra and Shatila massacre. And so another instance of, the book is really called By Way of Deception, by the way. And so another instance where they don't really care about us. They think that they're God's chosen people and that they can do whatever they want. It's like the 21st century version of the Manifest Destiny. That's what it reminds me of. Kind of like when
it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, this belief like we're God's chosen people. We can do, like James K. Polk taking California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, Colorado, parts of Wyoming, and then saying, oh, we're God's chosen people. We can steal this land from the Mexican community. We can steal this land from all the Native Americans. Ultimately, we're picked by God to occupy this real estate. Right? This is what they thought. And with the Israelis, they have the same view of the Palestinians. Oh, well, we're God's chosen people. They're not. They're these wicked, savage, crazy people. They're not right with God. We were the ones chosen by God. So, and we're indigenous to the land and whatever. So they think that they have the dominion to just do whatever they want, basically. And it's the sad thing is, people generally only care about themselves and their next of kin. But I think that if the U.S. gets deeper into this, gets dragged more into this, then you're going to see more, I think, of a reaction. You're going to see more of an uproar. I think the anti-war protests that would come out of, like, direct intervention by the U.S. would be bigger. It would dwarf Vietnam, especially because we have social media today, whereas our predecessors in the 60s did not.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, I agree 100% that as long as you can think about these things abstractly, people are going to be less likely to take it seriously. That's just that's the human condition, unfortunately, that, like how I mentioned earlier, that people don't generally vote on foreign policy. And there is one exception to that. And that's what Alex mentioned. And that's if there are actual Americans dying in a war, because then they'll start to ask, okay, why is my cousin dead? All right, why am I seeing people I know not coming back? Why is my friend missing an arm? And they start asking these questions of like, okay, well, what are we getting out of this? And the answer is, in this case, so, Israel can take over a tiny stretch of land next to the Mediterranean Sea. Not good enough. Sorry, that's not going to work. So that would be one way to focus it out. Oh man, there's something you mentioned I forgot to write down. I have a horrible memory when it comes to this stuff that I can't want to talk about. But shit, yeah, God, I don't want to forget it. But I wanted a couple other things too. The manifest destiny thing was a perfect example. It's so good. I'm angry I never thought of it. Like that is such a good example right there, because it's literally the same thing. The only difference is that, ours is just kind of made out of whole cloth. if anything, like at least like the Israelis from the river to the sea, I'll get to that too, river to the sea, but that they can like at least pretend to point to like an ancient prophecy or something. No, we just like, nope, we're here. It's ours now. I remember when I was in college, we were going over, it was like in Western Civ 1 or something like that. And our professor asked us like, okay, so this manifest destiny thing, how did the Americans know that they had this manifest destiny? And I was like, well, they didn't. Like, hey, you're right. They didn't. They just literally made it up. And it's weird that manifest destiny doesn't have a more negative connotation, because it really doesn't. It's just, oh yeah, that was just what we were supposed to do, from sea to shining sea. And everyone kind of rolls around with, oh, Vietnam, that's what it was. I don't remember what you said, but I wanted to bring it up. But how the war was obviously wrong. Like comically, hilariously evil, and we got nothing out of it. I remember talking to someone I knew a long time ago. I went to what are they called? VFW. I don't remember where I was there. It was like a meeting place or something. And I went to the men's room at the VFW, and the urinals had pictures of Jane Fonda in the urinals. And most people didn't even know what was going on. They're like, who is this lady and why is her picture in the urinal? And that was Jane Fonda. Why? And it's like, if you don't know this shit, you'd be confused by it. So for those of you who don't know what I'm referencing, back in the 70s, Jane Fonda, maybe the 60s, I don't know what the actual year it took place. I'm guessing the 70s. It was protesting the Vietnam War. And they called her Hanoi Jane. And because she went over to Vietnam, and they took pictures of her, sitting on Viet Cong anti-aircraft weapons and stuff, and saying that, she's a traitor to this nation. And I was telling this to someone I knew years ago, and he was talking about, I don't think it's cool that, Jane Fonda did that. Because, look, I get that you don't support the war, but American troops are over there dying, and that's not something that you do. I said, look, let me break this down for you. Okay. So the country of Vietnam was being colonized, literally colonized by France. Like, I'm not saying that in a flippant way or a parable and no, it was a literal French colony that had appointed a puppet king, like a monarchy, to rule over these people, to extract their wealth and to subjugate them under the boots of a Western European nation. And so the people of Vietnam revolted. They said, no, we don't like this anymore. We're going to revolt against this Western nation and try to take our country back for ourselves. And we're going to decide to make a communist government. That's what we want. And the Americans said, no, sorry, we're not letting that slide. We're going to come in and defend the French colonial, instituted monarchy and everything like that, and try to uphold the system that the people of Vietnam don't want. And so we're now, not only we're going to do that, we're going to draft American boys and send them over to fight and die in a jungle to do this for us at our behest. Like, they don't want to. They've made that very clear. They're protesting all the time and saying this is unjust. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to kill Vietnamese people unjustly. We're going to kill Americans unjustly. And I'm supposed to be mad at Jane Fonda here? Like, what? Why would I be mad at her for this? Like, that's far more noble. And look, it's easy to say that I wasn't around in 1968 and being drafted into the Vietnam War, like to go fight an unjust war. And look, fine, like I get it. Like, you know, you don't want to go to prison. That could ruin the rest of your life. You don't want to, you know, risk crippling any future, and plus, especially with the environment at the time, you could have been, you know, outcast by your family and stuff. I'm not defending like the actions of it, but I get why people did it. I have a hell of a lot more respect for who did dodge, though. Like I do, like people who ran. I was like, yeah, fine, that's the moral thing to do. Which is also why I hate when people shit on Trump for. Although, look, for dodging the war. Yeah, look, he shouldn't have been able to do it the way he did it. Like he got to dodge it because he was a rich guy. But on the list of things that I'm mad at Trump for, dodging the Vietnam War is not high. Sorry, it's just not very high on that. And one more thing I want to mention too, where you talked about how one of the things that the Israelis like to talk about is that how, you know, we're indigenous to this land. Did you know the DNA tests are illegal in Israel? You know, you can't buy them there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Say what?
I did know that. Yeah.
That's true. Why are they illegal, Alex? Why would they do something like that?
Well, yeah, because often people make claims about DNA to establish indigeneity. I know that with many Native American societies here in the United States, they don't do DNA. It's about having a cultural tie to the land. And so with many in Israel, certainly those that are Ashkenazi Jewish, the idea is that a lot of their DNA would be European. It wouldn't establish that there's any sort of long-standing tie they have to the Levant. And so making the DNA test illegal essentially prevents anybody from making a DNA-based argument.
Yeah.
And so,
that's so. I want to tackle both those points. So, yeah, it's like a lot of the defense that people will have on why the Israelis should be allowed to, you know, just massacre as many people as they want with no repercussions, no questions asked, no strings attached, is because they have a, you know, like a direct, they are direct descendants from the original inhabitants of this land. They claim that they're the indigenous population. DNA does not show that, like it doesn't. And you're 100% correct about. When I was a kid, I remember being very annoyed that every other person I met claimed to be part Cherokee Indian, and no one was calling this out. I would say, I remember I was just talking to people and they'd say, oh yeah, well, it was always their grandmother. It was always their grandmother was like half Cherokee. It was always like that exact same answer. And I would ask them, hey, how do you know that you're part Cherokee? And like, oh, I get really tan in the summer. Or look how high my cheekbones are. So that's not evidence. That's not, whatever it is. That's not. I'm not saying you're not, but you haven't given any evidence at all that you actually. And so I couldn't believe how many people bought this. People just said it, you know, with such a flippant manner. And then I learned, like you were talking about, how a lot of people lie about this. That they. Essentially, like people tried to claim it's like in the post-Civil War era. A lot of people started doing this to claim like benefits and stuff. It was widespread, and I would I would talk about Elizabeth Warren with this very same thing, because Elizabeth Warren made a huge deal about how she was part Native American. She wrote it on like she wrote like in her bio that she was the first woman of color to attend. Was it Yale or Harvard or something like that? And, you know, she wrote a cookbook called Pow Wow Chow. You know that? She wrote a cookbook. Yeah. It's just like, so, and then Donald Trump called her out on this. Keep going back to Trump. I can't believe how often he's coming up in this thing. Donald Trump called her out on this and says, I don't believe you're Native American. I don't. He's like, you have no evidence for it. I don't buy it. And he kept calling her Pocahontas. And people were talking about how, well, that's racist. Like, no, it's not. It's not racist. Like, because he's not making fun of her for being Native American. He's making fun of her because he doesn't believe that she is. That is not a call. And actually, that's a joke I would make. That's literally a joke I would make. If someone was claiming to be Native American, I just call them that, say, oh, okay, sure thing, Sitting Bull or whatever. But but hold on a second. Sorry. It's like I'm gonna die over here. I'm coughing and everything. But And then Elizabeth Warren made one of the biggest political miscalculations I've ever seen. Where she actually went and got a DNA test done. And it turned out, she had one Native American ancestor like 350 years ago, like someone she had never met, obviously, but someone she had no cultural ties to. Right. She had like less than the average amount of Native American ancestry in the United States. And if I remember thinking, and she released it. There you go. Look at that. And I was like, wow, if I took that DNA test and got that result, it would have never seen the light of day. No one would have seen that. And so when I point this out, I was like, all right, that was a pretty big fuck up on Elizabeth Warren's part. I would hear what you just said. I'm not saying this is your point, but people would say, well, being part of a Native American tribe isn't necessarily tied to DNA. Like they don't use blood quantum to make sure you're part, because it is a cultural connection. It's like being from the state of Missouri. There's no blood analysis to prove from the state of Missouri. But the thing with Elizabeth Warren is she didn't have the cultural connection either. She had nothing. Like she didn't know what tribe that person was from, what part of the country they lived in. She just like she bought into tradition that was like family lore that was passed down, like a lot of these other people, and she bought it. And it's just like, okay, you were just fooled by this. It's all right. And I forgot to mention something here where you talk about if it affects you and the morality. This is actually from like 2 topics ago, but this is too good. I got to share it for everybody watching here. That when I remember one of the moments in my life that made me really angry. When Trump was running for president back in 2015, and back then it was the Syrians. Back then people were really afraid of Syria. It seems so long ago that people would talk about. I remember Trump mentioning that there were tens of thousands of Syrian refugees in the United States. He said that, these people are, which really upset me. And I'm not going to go into the long story about it because Alex already knows and you guys be bored by it and everything. But the United States had been targeting Syria for a long time. Like, I think it was like Operation Timber Sycamore or something. It was in 2011. Yep. I can't remember what it was called. Yeah. And, going after Assad and, splitting loyalties in Syria because for a lot of reasons, but we want to control the natural gas deposits in Syria. We don't want the Russians to have control, that sphere of influence. And, toppled Syria, not toppled them, but destabilized Syria so that, we have refugees that are trying to escape. And then when the people whose lives are upended because of America's actions, when they say, okay, can we immigrate to the United States? No, you're too dangerous. Sorry. No, you guys are the problem. People don't know this and it enraged me, but this has just been our response in general throughout history. Because, you were talking about how no one gave a shit about what was happening to Jewish people in Germany until Pearl Harbor. And then we got involved. It was like, oh, well, I guess we got to come help out then. And even to this day, we take credit for ending the Holocaust when the Soviets did a lot more work than we did. But this is the Americans' opinions on Jewish refugees in 1938. And for those of you who are in Alabama, that is 3 years before we joined the Civil War. But we have all right, so this is public opinion polls. This is after Kristallnacht. Polls conducted several weeks after Kristallnacht attacks found that Americans overwhelmingly disapproved of the Nazi treatment of Jews, but most did not want more Jewish refugees to immigrate to the United States. So they asked them, hey, do you approve of what the Nazis are doing to the Jewish people? Pretty much everybody says no. They're like, no, that's bad news. Should we help them? 71% said no. 71%. So this is sadly par for the course in the United States, that we can point out, okay, that massacre going on, that's not cool. I don't like it. Am I willing to have them come here, like these victims? No, not going to happen. We're terrified of them. And this is the Israelis are doing a similar thing with what's going. I mean, I think it's where they talk about it. So I get why they're doing it in the Israeli government, whatever, they got to do the evil propaganda and everything. But when people here who don't have to do it start saying this, that's when it really concerns me. Like, why are you going to bat so hard for this? Because they'll say, well, I feel really bad for the innocent Palestinians who are being killed, but it's all the fault of Hamas. They're trying to get rid of Hamas and the collateral damage is happening, but those are innocent people. They don't deserve desires. Like, okay, well, why doesn't Israel just take in the innocent people you're talking about? Well, no, they can't do that. They can't. That'd be too dangerous. Like, okay, are they innocent or not? Well, what's going on here? Oh no, did I lose you, Alex? God damn it. You guys on stream, can you hear me? I see you're there. Can someone comment and let me know if I'm... Oh, Alex, are you back?
Yep. Yeah, no, the last thing I heard was innocent Palestinians and then cut off.
Yeah, so what really annoys me is when people here in the United States who don't have to spread the propaganda, it's not like they work for Israeli intelligence or anything, they're talking about well, we feel really bad for the innocent. Thank you, Kevin. I had lost you, and I asked people who were watching if they could hear me and commented something. But I asked, there were like the innocent Palestinians who were killed. It's just because we're going after Hamas, and these innocent folks are collateral damage, and so Israel has to do that. And they're like, okay, well, why don't the Israelis take all the innocent people in as refugees? And go, well, no, they can't do that. That's outside the question. We guys, okay, so you don't really believe they're innocent after all. And so it just annoys me that people will say the most immoral shit imaginable and not even bother to justify it. I really don't get it at all.
I mean, yeah, exactly correct. They don't really care. And first of all, too, when they say that, oh, they're just targeting Hamas, I'm thinking, well, why does Hamas exist to begin with? I mean, they didn't just hop into existence back in 1948. They didn't come into existence until 1987. That's not my opinion. That's the facts. And that is because, for example, I know I talked a bit about Lebanon earlier, but when the Palestinians laid down their arms in Lebanon and evacuated Lebanon and went to Tunisia, like they said they would, like Yasser Arafat and the PLO, he held up his end of the bargain and said, okay, we'll lay down our arms here in Lebanon. We'll stop fighting. We'll relocate our headquarters to Tunisia and continue our fight against Israel from there. Well, that's why Reagan sent the Marines in. Lebanon's president, Elias Sarkis, reached out to the U.S. and said, hey, I can't stop the Syrians. I can't stop the Israelis. I can't stop the Palestinians. Literally, no one's listening to me. I need the U.S. to come in and help me. And his plan was, hey, I'll talk to Arafat, get him to evacuate. And then that ostensibly is supposed to mean that both the Israelis and the Syrians under Hafez al-Assad withdraw. Initially, Hafez al-Assad came into Lebanon as well to kill Palestinians, and then that caused huge rifts with the Maronite Christians, with the Kataib party specifically. And they were very heavily, one, they were modeled after the Nazi party, and two, they were heavily allied to Israel, ironically, given their foundations. But
right.
Not going to talk about that. And so the Palestinians did. This is why the Marines came into Lebanon on August 25th of 1982, and it was the evacuation took place from the 25th of August to September 10th of 82. The Palestinians laid down their arms. 4 days later, Bashir Gemayel, the son of the Kataib party's founder, Pierre Gemayel, gets assassinated by someone loyal to Assad. Nothing to do with the Palestinians, but Ariel Sharon, who was later the prime minister of Israel, he was the defense minister at that time. He was one of Benjamin Netanyahu's mentors. He and Bashir Gemayel were like that. He loved Bashir Gemayel. So when Bashir Gemayel was killed, the assumption was, oh, it was the Palestinians. They did it. So he ordered according to the Kahan Commission report, Israel's own report on this, and my mom saw this happen, where Israeli troops surrounded the camps and they fired elimination rounds into the sky at night, while the phalangist hitmen with Israeli weapons went in there, gunned down, beat to death, and raped approximately 3,000 Palestinian civilians, most of which were women and children. And there were, to my understanding, some elderly folks in there as well. And anyway, so surrounding the camps prevents anybody from intervening to stop it. It also prevents anybody from leaving the camps to run away. So it was very sadistic. This is from September 16th through the 18th, 1982. And when Reagan had a knee-jerk reaction to that, instead of holding Israel accountable, he didn't. He just sent the Marines in there and gave them very vague orders, had them follow extremely restrictive rules of engagement. And when the Marines saw the aftermath of Sabra and Shatila, they actually tried to protect the civilian population of Lebanon. And this isn't propaganda for the U.S. military, right. I promise. I'm just explaining how maybe why sort of the how and why Americans maybe don't know very much about this, because this was probably Reagan's single biggest screw up, which is saying a lot in his case. And I'm obviously very biased, given that I'm the son of a Lebanese American myself. But when the Marines were there and they were, for example, patrolling the streets of Beirut, there were still Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon that had, for example, survived Sabra and Shatila. My mom lived on that same side of Lebanon and remembers when the Marines used to patrol. And she didn't speak English back then, but she remembers hearing them say they were from Camp Lejeune. My mom, being a native French speaker, heard Lejeune and goes, "Oh, that's a French name. It means the young in English." And so, anyway, she later figured that out. My mom grew up speaking Arabic and French, came here and learned English. And so anyway, when the Marines were patrolling the streets of Beirut, the Israelis continued. Like Sabra and Shatila wasn't enough. They wanted to keep going, killing more Palestinian women and children. And so the Palestinians would launch their attacks. Like they'd have, one Palestinian kid with an AK-47 shooting at a bunch of Israeli troops, and he'd run and hide behind the Marines. And the Marine Corps' own publications talk about this, how there were Palestinians hiding behind multinational force positions. The Israelis got pissed, and that led to a series of confrontations. The Marines told the Israelis, stay out. There was actually a story, February 2nd of 1983, when a Marine Corps captain jumped on top of an Israeli tank with a pistol drawn and actually threatened to blow the guy's head off, allegedly telling him, hey, you'll cross over my dead body. And rather than pick a fight with a company of U.S. Marines, the Israeli tank commander backed off. And my mom was hearing the transmissions of that in Arabic the day that it happened. And she said all the kids in the neighborhood, like no one could believe it. Like no one could just, like, mom said when Israeli tanks came through, all the kids would run and hide because you just never knew who they were going to just indiscriminately start, they'd blow up your house, they'd shoot you dead in the streets, they'd abduct you and beat you to death. I mean, you couldn't stop them basically. And with that being said, my mom said that especially when they were American troops doing this, or U.S. Marines specifically, my mom said, wow, this is kind of ridiculous. Aren't they allied? Well, no, there was a breach there. And the commandant of the Marine Corps, a month later, General Robert Barrow, actually wrote a scathing letter into Barrow, B-A-R-R-O-W. He wrote a scathing letter to the Secretary of Defense. At the time it was Caspar Weinberger, and he was criticizing and harassing, he was talking about how the Israelis were criticizing and harassing U.S. Marines. He talked about how Marines were constantly being put in life-threatening situations by the Israelis who were shooting at Marines and trying to intimidate them. And rather than listen to what General Barrow was saying, Reagan basically did the exact opposite. He kept giving weapons to the Israelis, and he also was quietly giving weapons to Iran, knowing full well that Reagan gave the Iranians the incentive to attack the United States, basically. I mean, this is why the U.S. Embassy was blown up on April 18th of 1983. And then a few months later, the barracks were hit. And Hafez al-Assad also had a hand in that because he was also trying to take over Lebanon for his own interests. And so anyway, just an absolute foreign policy catastrophe for the United States when it could have been one of the biggest foreign policy W's of all time had Reagan just listened and been like, yeah, let's open fire on the Israelis and start kicking their asses for basically starting a civil war in another country because they were the ones by funneling weapons to the Phalange Party and trying to turn Lebanon into this like Maronite Christian ethno state instead of a single unified leftist state with equal rights for everyone, which is what Fuad Shihab intended for Lebanon. He was Lebanon's third president and one of our most famous presidents ever. The Israelis like, oh, no, can't have that. Equal rights for Palestinians, no, can't do that at all. There should be a Maronite Christian ethno state where only the Christians can control the presidency, the prime ministership, or seats in parliament. And that way of thinking is what started a civil war, because as more Palestinian refugees came to Lebanon, there was this threat of a demographic imbalance. The Maronites became very angry. The radical ones became very angry. And so with Israel's help, they formed their own private militia and then tried to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians out of Lebanon. This is why they and the Israelis were such good friends. They were both following the same extreme far right mentality. And it's like, Lebanon was so much more beautiful when it was governed by leftists, and then the right one comes along and screws everything up. And so that's my certainly influenced a lot of my own political opinions. And yeah, anyway, so I hope I'm not going on too long off topic.
No,
I just thought it was relevant to bring up.
No, it is. I'm always because it is unfortunate how so much history does get lost through narratives, like not even through like the truth. Like Reagan, for example, how you're mentioning how Reagan doesn't get any, I was gonna say nearly enough shit. He doesn't get any shit for like the barracks bombing and stuff like that. Like none. When like one of the most embarrassing incidents and acts of cowardice and incompetence that you could possibly imagine from the chief executive of the United States of America. And I can't remember the name of the naval ship that shot down the Iranian passenger jet. That happened under Reagan too. Although that was like in 87. You could argue Reagan's brain wasn't even fully functioning at the time, whatever. But, the Reagan administration is full of, you mentioned how, the barracks bombing was one of the worst incidents in Reagan's presidency. And you also how there is a strong field of competition for worst foreign policy blunders under Reagan. And it's all lost to, oh yeah, he was the cowboy actor badass who was, basically Teddy Roosevelt again, speak softly and carry a big stick. And he brought down the Berlin Wall with his bare hands and he got everything. No, Reagan was a catastrophe. Like in every part of the world, in Europe, in Central America, in the Middle East, like you name it. He made it a worse place, and it's just kind of sad how that is. So I do appreciate you bringing light because you have a lot of life experience and historical knowledge on this that surpasses like anyone I've met, honestly, when it comes to this. So like the voice is necessary, but. Yeah, I kept you a little longer than I wanted. I'm sorry.
No, this is good.
I do appreciate your insight on this, and we're gonna have you on the show again sometime. Like John and I have stuff booked out. Like it's his month next month to book all the guests and everything. We'll try to get you after that. I usually ask people to plug their content here, but I don't know if you want to do that with yours for reasons that I think but. Any recommendations? I'll put it that way. Any recommendations for people to follow, or books to read, or content to watch? Anything on that?
So, oh gosh, for me, I read a lot of JSTOR articles. I read a lot of academic journals. It's hard for me to sort of name books off the top of my head. I would say By Way of Deception is certainly a good one if you're interested in what's happening between Israel and Palestine. Definitely a good read. It's written back in 1990, so it might seem a little bit dated, but I think a lot of the themes in that book are certainly still relevant in today's times. And so that's certainly one book that I would highly recommend everybody give a read. And then I'd also say too, and again, not some plug for the US military at all, but the Marine Corps' own publication about 1982 to 84 in Lebanon, talking about the mission and kind of how things transpired the way that they did, and particularly the harassment of US troops by the Israelis. I thought that's kind of interesting in terms of how the Marine Corps' own, like Marines.mil, their own publication documented that. And I'm surprised that's still allowed to be in circulation. But it definitely is. And I'm thinking if more Americans knew about that, because America always claims to love its troops, right? So I'm wondering if that would maybe dissuade some people who currently support Israel from supporting Israel. Because, well, this is written by the Beirut veterans of America that were there, that lived through all of this. And so definitely interesting, and I think worth at least maybe not reading the whole thing, but reading segments of it. General Barrow's letter also, it's kind of part of that. Certainly interesting read. And yeah, otherwise, I'm trying to think of stuff like actual novels and books to read. Other than that, I'm pretty boring. I read a lot of encyclopedias.
Well, look,
I read.
Listen, man after my own heart. I don't know if I've talked about this with you before, but I don't read books like cover to cover. I've read maybe 2 books in 10 years. Now, as a kid, I read a billion books, from, high school, college, and grad school. But I always say I reached critical mass on reading full books a long time ago. I don't have time for that shit. I'm sorry. And I can learn. To me, at least, reading is one of the less efficient ways to learn. Well, reading entire books is one of the less efficient ways to learn. There's sections and stuff, or, like publications or articles and stuff, documentaries. Just, I don't know. I feel the exact same way. I have a hard time telling people what books to actually reference. I kind of did it out of habit because a lot of people do. But I do have a documentary to tell you folks about, and it's easily accessible. I don't know if Alex, I don't know if you're familiar with Empire Files with Abby Martin. I don't know if you're familiar with her at all, but she does a lot of great work on foreign relations or foreign policy in the United, and just foreign issues. Like she has great stuff on Venezuela, but she has an amazing documentary on Palestine that I learned a lot about when I watched it years ago. And it's not just about Palestine, actually. It's about Zionism more than anything else. It's about Zionism, and which, of course, Palestine is an integral part of the whole concept of Zionism. And she talks about the earliest incarnations of Zionism in Europe back in, I don't know, the 19th century or whatever, and how this idea just kind of grew and grew. And interesting, like Israel wasn't their only option. They had several different places they were looking at. They were looking at, I think, Ghana or Uganda, I can't remember, Argentina, places like that. And they settled on Israel, and how Israel, like our modern incarnation of Israel that we know today, has always been a settler colonial project. And then the people who crafted, idea, they didn't hide it. They weren't pretending it. It's a very modern argument. Like, no, this isn't colonialism. Like, that's the way they saw it 100 years ago. That's 100% how they saw this. And the actions that led to the Intifadas, the words by David Ben Gurion, and how, we're here to, cleanse the Arab population. Now, I don't know if this is in the documentary, but there's a clip I saw with President Truman. And President Truman, he's standing in front of this big map of the Middle East, and he's talking about, so a lot of people, and he actually says, we got this thing with, Palestine and moving the European Jewish population to Palestine. And a lot of the Zionists weren't happy with it, with the plan that we set up, because, and his exact words were something like, it's hard to take 4 million people from a country and then expel 4 million people from another country and fill it up. He's like, that's not easy to do. And neither side's going to be happy with this. So we kind of got this compromise here. We'll see where we go from there. Yeah. Like Truman's like, yeah. And then he says, and then, they'll kind of figure it out as time goes on. It's like, okay, that was always the plan to begin with. And one more thing, I know I said it was one thing I forgot to mention a while ago with the DNA test and the cultural ties. I meant to mention this too, that, the cultural argument is what, they'll use now because they don't do the DNA test and everything. But that doesn't work either, because ask like Ethiopian Jews how they feel about them in Israel. Like, see if the cultural tie is good enough when it comes to that. But anyway, Empire Files, Abby Martin's documentary on Palestine, fantastic. I couldn't recommend it enough. And Alex, I appreciate it so much, man. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming on.
No, I appreciate you having me. I just remember when it was a few months back when you had it live, and I went up on your panel, and we were talking, and I was kind of just describing just why I am progressive, why I have the political views that I have. And it was John who came in there, and he said, we should have this guy on the podcast. And I didn't see it coming. I wasn't expecting that. I thought, wow, it was like you and John are two of my favorite content creators. And so I didn't see it coming. I really appreciated it. I really enjoyed when I was on a few months back, and I thought, man, I want to do this again. But there were some scheduling conflicts, and I had a lot going on. I'm sure you did too. And so I was glad that at least today it kind of worked out. I'm actually not in my normal office space. I'm So I live down in San Diego, but I'm back up my hometown now. And so it's just glad that I was able to kind of make it work. So, and I hope that your viewers and stuff too appreciate.
They'll love it. They'll love it. This is good stuff.
All right, I appreciate it. This is live, right?
Yeah, it's live. Yeah, so it's like it'll be live, and then so the way we do the show now, I do like the regular show. We do a live show, and then I cut it up into clips, and I do the same thing on my personal account. So this goes live, and then I cut it up into clips and post it. So this will be like 4 or 5 videos probably.
Okay. And then I don't want to hold it because I know you've probably got a busy schedule. I know I've got to get one pretty soon here too. So you have your channel, and then there's the Left Wing Pod. So what's the so I guess what motivated you? Like, what's the difference, I guess, between like the Left Wing Pod and your main channel?
So the Left Wing Pod is just politics, and mine is whatever the hell I want to talk about. And so I'll do politics, I'll do movies, I'll do religion. It's just like my own personal stuff. And so I also have another channel too. It's not mine, but it's called the Kids from It podcast. Long story about the name, but it's about basically about independent fundamental Christianity and breaking away from it. So I do like 3 little YouTube channels and stuff. And this one is I have a lot more freedom. I don't gotta, check with John to see if he wants to talk about something or anything. And I just kind of do my own. So in fact, I don't know why I didn't do this. I was thinking, should I stream this on my account and the Left Wing Pod? Because this fits right in with the Left Wing stuff. But I didn't ask John first, and I want to be rude and say, hey, I'm going to take this over, because we always clear it with each other before we do that. But otherwise, we'll do it. But yeah, we'll try to have you on again if you're free later this summer. Like I said, I think the next 7 weeks of guests are still booked out. But, I guess late summer, early fall, we'll see if our schedules can realign again.
Yeah, probably sometime late in September would be probably best for me.
That's great then.
Yeah,
that's great. That's great.
So, but
good stuff.
Yeah, another thing too, you mentioned Christianity. I do have thoughts on that as well, because I've actually come across. So I was kind of a long story, but when you talk about radical Christianity, so I talked about the phalangists in Lebanon. They're every bit as bad as the evangelicals in the Deep South. I'll say that with my full chest. They tried to kill my mom when she was 7 years old, so I'm very jaded.
Oh no.
Yeah. I was muted temporarily. That's weird.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. But yeah, so there's that. But also too, um, I've actually met when I was in college, when I was in undergrad specifically. I remember coming across street preachers that were holding up
Oh
signs
God.
talking about like, oh, against abortion and gay marriage and vote Trump and all this other stuff. And it blew my mind because a lot of the evangelicals. So the Republican Party used to be more like modern day libertarians back in like Barry Goldwater's day in the 60s. And Barry Goldwater actually ends up becoming very disillusioned with the Republican Party in the 80s, because in the 80s it was Reagan who courted the Christian right into the Republican Party. So all of the Bible thumpers down south, they basically colonized the Republican Party. This is where Republicans started blowing a gasket over gay marriage, over abortion, over separation of church and states, and other social issues. Now they really target like the trans community, for example, and they blow a gasket over like, oh, Leah Thomas winning the swimming contest. Like they just, and like people who've never watched a swimming competition a day in their life, now suddenly they're experts and they're up in arms. And so that voting bloc, like for example, most Zionists are not people who identify as Jewish. They're evangelical Christians who think that Jesus isn't going to come back without Israel's existence. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, these are folks who essentially still cling to that manifest destiny mentality, where they think that God has given them dominion over not just the US, but anywhere else around the world. A lot of American exceptionalism is tied to this I don't even want to call it Christianity, because I know Jesus Christ, if you were alive today, would be beating the crap out of these people for like bastardizing his name and image. Because I'm thinking, well, Jesus Christ, to my understanding, was a very impoverished Palestinian Jewish person who hated wealth, who hated private ownership. I mean, he was basically a communist, if you really think about it. I mean,
yeah, it's like a proto-communist.
The dude is a straight-up communist. So where are you all getting off with this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, like instead of this black-haired, olive-skinned version of Jesus? Rather than the historically and scientifically accurate Jesus, they created their own, who's this blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy who just thinks that everybody who doesn't agree with him deserves to suffer or should be evangelized in some way. And I'm like, they control so much of the political discourse of the US. They're a core demographic of Trump's voting base, certainly. And it's the same people who, for example, support Israel, that supported the invasion of Iraq, and that basically will support bombing, attacking, pillaging, and plundering any country that threatens America's economic interests. Because that's really what U.S. foreign policy has always been about. It's always been first and foremost about economic interests. What's going to benefit the country economically? Does the U.S. really care about Taiwan, for example, because the poor, poor people of Taiwan are the human rights? No, it's because there are microchips in Taiwan, and you have tech companies like Google, Apple, and Microsoft that lobby Congress, and they don't want China taking over because they fear losing their precious supply of microchips. So it's not about human rights. They don't give a crap. All they care about is having a cheap smartphone, a cheap computer, and so on and so forth. Right? A cheap iPad, we can go down the line of what microchips are used for. So the evangelicals will promote this idea that, oh yeah, China evil, China bad. They criticize the U.S. How dare you ever criticize the U.S.? Every country that America attacks, pillages, plunders, bombs, invades, or sanctions, they deserved it, right? And the idea is that they're wicked and crazy, and we have to civilize them. It is a colonial mentality, if I've ever seen one, and the fact that we have people who still defend it, and it's like they defend it because they benefit from it. That's the reality, and that transcends race, that transcends ethnicity. I mean, that's anybody can just associate themselves with this mindset. And the usual defense that I get is, oh, well, that's human history, that's human nature, it's Darwinism. Civilizations and people and animals have been fighting since the dawn of time. And this is how we evolve as a species. You can't just have this bleeding heart, caring so much about this. I'm like, okay, if you're against abortion and if you're against, baby killing, then how can you then turn around and say that the life of, for example, a Palestinian or a Libyan or a Syrian or a Mexican is worth less than somebody who was, born and raised here in the U.S. and some blonde-haired, blue-eyed child that you think looks like Jesus? Like, how exactly do you make that distinction, right? And so to my understanding, I watched all your videos. You grew up surrounded by these people.
Yeah.
And so, to my understanding, I mean, you've had all this stuff force fed down your throat. Like, I remember you showing me like the evangelicals book about the Civil War. I remember reading that and I'm like, I was cringing so hard. I'm thinking like, how does anybody write this crap into a textbook and then pass it off as legitimate history? I mean, it's like,
Man, the book is right over there. It's across the room. The book is actually the reason I started this channel, that I meant to do like a whole series on it. I haven't done it yet. It's been like a year and I haven't done it, but that book, because I have several of those books. I ordered a bunch of those books from my old Christian school, and I have like 9 or 10 of them. And I've been wanting to go through like chapter by chapter. Most of the chapters are fine, honestly, but some of them are like nightmares, like what you saw there. And I will say, just while I'm on topic, the science books, surprisingly strong. I was amazed, like reading the science books, because the thing that the science books will do is that they'll be like, well, just so you know, evolution is bullshit, and God created the world 6,000 years ago. And obviously that's nonsense. But when it gets into like the meat and potatoes of it, like it's like, here's how gravity works, and objects fall toward the center of the earth at 9.8 meters per second square. Like, okay, all right, they got that right. So, but I thank you for reminding of that, because I meant to do it. And I know we keep trying to say this is the last thing I'll say, but there's so much I want to say what everything you mentioned here about the evangelical Christian version of Jesus is a character who does not exist. It's someone who is just, it is wild, man, that I remember. This is something that I remember thinking growing up in this movement, that if you read the Bible, the New Testament specifically about Jesus, the one consistent theme about Jesus is how much he fucking despises rich people. You can't find any time when rich people come up where Jesus isn't constantly shitting on them. He is dunking on them and embarrassing them at every available opportunity. And that's not how churches work, though. Churches talk about caring for the poor, but they love the rich. And it's questionable if they even care for the poor, because that's where their bread is buttered. The rich people donate the most. And there's a whole Bible story about rich people just dumping giant bags of cash into the synagogue to donate. And this woman throws in like 2 pennies or something like that. And he tells the disciples, that woman is given more than all those men. They're like, what are you talking about? I say, well, that's all that she had, and she's giving it to help. And they're giving us like actual like percentages of income, stuff that conservatives still don't understand today. And them you know, the caping for Taiwan and everything, because they really care about the Taiwanese people. And they're like, no, they just a lot of it too goes back to the fact that there's a lot of people who are just eager to start this neo-Cold War against China. And you can tell by the people who are always talking about how they're afraid the Chinese are going to come attack us any moment. It's like, no, they're not, folks. It's like, it's in no one's interest for China to start a hot war against the United States. Like, these people don't seem to understand that the United States collapses, everything collapses. The Chinese government knows that. Like, we have a symbiotic economic relationship, and the stability of planet Earth is kind of dependent on 2 of the most powerful nations not fighting each other. And also, it is also interesting that you mentioned when people talk about how capitalism is great and how this is the human nature argument, that humans are naturally selfish. And yeah, to an extent we are, but we're also naturally compassionate. We're also naturally altruistic. It's not a one or the other thing, that we have good qualities and bad qualities, and we kind of level that out. But diving all in and saying, well, obviously people are just going to be selfish, is like, or that, you know, this is just Darwinism. Don't you people believe in creationism? Like, you don't even believe in Darwinism. Like, it's just we've got out. Yeah, I'll have you on again to talk about that. That sounds like a really good topic that we can go over a lot, because like the overlap, because I'm not super familiar with, you know, how like it works in the Middle East and everything like that. But the fact that you notice such strong similarities is pretty fascinating. But okay, all right, well, I'll let you go, folks. We appreciate you watching. We'll catch you later. Stay tuned for when Alex and I team up again, and we'll get it figured out. I'll close it out here.